Hey guys, I'm Dov, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. We're here again with the High Elves, going to be facing up against the Azray, our cousins, the Wood Elves. So let's go ahead and take a look at the army composition. We've got Tyrion on his steed here. He's got the Heart of Avalorn, as well as Sunfang. He's also got Foe Seeker and Feint Riposte for that extra combat stat buff and physical resistance. Heart of Avalorn, of course, gives him a huge burst of healing if he gets super low. Sunfang is, of course, a magic and fire breath attack that does a ton of damage. Of course, you guys have seen it before. Very, very cool. We've got a High Mage on the horse here. We've got Apotheosis and Tempest for that flying snare and some more healing. We've got 2 units of Silver Helms. Honestly, Dragon Princes are very good in this matchup because they do have the fire resistance, so they're pretty much immune to Starfire shafts, and they'll completely outclass all Wood Elf cavalry. That being said, Silver Helms with shields will hold their own against Wild Riders and things like that. They'll be very good against the low armor infantry if you can get into rear charges and favorable engagements. Obviously, you don't want to charge something like Eternal Guard or Azrai Spear right in the face, but nevertheless can be very useful in this matchup. So we've got 2 of them. We've also got 2 Tiranoc chariots. I also think these guys are very useful in this matchup, particularly for countering Sisters of Thorn, and here's why. They actually do magic damage with their bows, and Sisters of Thorn, of course, have 50% physical resistance. They can give themselves 22% missile resistance, but still, this magical ammo from these Tiranoc chariots will be cutting right through that physical resistance and is going to be a great counter to Sisters of Thorn. In addition, of course, they're chariots, so they're going to be very good against Wood Elf infantry. If my opponent happens to not bring Sisters of Thorn, we can just put them into melee mode and run shop. For the front line, we've gone nice and wide with 5 units of Spearmen. Honestly, you don't need much more than these guys against the Wood Elves, as they don't carry a lot of armor. We've also got 4 units of Lothern Sea Guard with shields, of course, to give them that missile block chance. And again, very long range. You don't need armor piercing against the Wood Elves, so the High Elf archers will definitely shine in this matchup. That's about it for my build. For my opponent, you can see he's got Vanguard deployed behind me, 2 units of Way Watchers in some sneaky action. And then over here in the woods is the rest of his force. He's got, let's see here, 3 units of Dryads. We've also got 2 units of Glade Guards with Starfire shafts, 2 War Dancers with Azrai Spear, a Branch Wraith with just Earthblood, no melee attack buff or anything else. Durthu's got Sword of Daith and just, let's see, I believe that is Flock of Doom. And he's also got the Lamentation of Despair and Foe Seeker. He's also got 2 units of Sisters of Thorn here, so I'm definitely glad I brought those Tiranoc chariots to help counter them. And that's about it. So I'm just running up here with Tyrion, trying to do some scouting because I can't currently see any of these guys. My opponent's kind of pushing up and around this way, but since the battle started and I immediately couldn't see anything, I knew my opponent was probably hiding something in the forest, so we're just going to kind of square up here against where I think he is, even though he's more kind of over on this side. Now you can see he's starting to be emerging from this forest, and these Tiranoc chariots do spot these Sisters of Thorn here, who are momentarily out of the woods and going to be taking a little bit of missile fire there. Didn't actually drop a unit model, but you can see they were able to actually do a little bit of HP damage there. So it is worth noting as well that the Tiranoc chariot has a multi-shot. I believe it's 3 shots per volley. If we go ahead and take a look here, they are pretty fast, so it might be hard to see. Yeah, 3 shots per volley. You can see the Way Watchers have sprung their trap here, going to be firing into the Tiranoc chariots, but that doesn't mean they've exposed themselves to these Silver Helms without any major support here. My opponent is going to be pulling over his Sisters of Thorn to try and help out on this side while we kind of brace up for this mainline engagement here. Meanwhile, I'm pulling this other damaged Tiranoc chariot over around to the other side because I don't want it to get too badly hurt here. But these Silver Helms, due to the fact that Way Watchers missiles no longer stagger cavalry, which I always thought was a little bit ridiculous, they fixed that in the last patch. These Silver Helms are going to get a nice charge in here on these Way Watchers. Very good stuff. You can see, though, that this Tiranoc chariot has taken some pretty solid damage. No unit models dropped so far, so I probably should pop an Apotheosis, but I'm not quite on my micro. You can see in the mainline engagement, we're dropping a Sunfang right on those Dryads. We're just pouring in the fire into this rear line area here onto these this unit of Glade Guards with Starfire shafts with all 4 Lothern Sea Guard. Tyrion also fighting in the main line, going to be smacking around some of these Branch Wraiths, or sorry, Dryads here. But Durthu comes in. Tyrion doesn't want to take that fight, so he's going to back up and just let those Spearmen kind of hold for a minute here. We've also got the spearmen engaging all across the line. I am going to try and push these spearmen up and past the flanks since my opponent's kind of blobbed up a little bit here. Meanwhile, over in this mobile engagement, my Silverhelms are getting a little bit caught up on the Sisters of Thorn. We're bringing around the other unit of Silverhelms to try and get on this unit of archers. Likewise, we're kind of pressuring with the Tiranoc chariots here, and then we're going to pull away. I decide to bring these Silverhelms over here and use the Tiranoc chariots to fire in on the rear of these Sisters of... all tongue-tied here. Sisters of the Thorn. You can see, though, a couple of Tiranoc chariot unit models are dropping there. That unit is pretty much combat ineffective at this point. But we are going to catch this other unit of Way Watchers with the Silver Helms here. Definitely paying dividends coming after a more expensive skirmisher unit and just pummeling them into the dirt. Definitely teaching them not to come to Ulthuan. We are on one of the beautiful Ulthuan maps. But you can see my front line has been broken through a little bit here. We've got the other auxiliary spearmen kind of supporting, holding back a few of the units here. Nice rear charge from the Sisters of Thorn, collapsing on those spearmen. They will take quite a bit of shock damage there, probably, because they're a relatively low armor unit. So this unit will probably rout. But thankfully, we've tied up this unit of Starfire Shafts in the rear and this one, both with the unit of spearmen. And these Lothran Seaguard will be able to hold their own for some time. Obviously, War Dancers with Azrai Spear are a much better unit. You can see we've affixed them with one of the Lothran Seaguard, and the other three are all firing in a nice concave of fire here. So these War Dancers are going to take a lot of hurt from this overwhelming amount of bow fire here. Tyrion is dueling Durthu here. Unfortunately, even though he has a flaming sword, he doesn't actually have flaming damage. Similar to Archaon, I think it's a little bit silly that it's animated that they have a flaming sword, but for whatever reason, it's not actually fire damage. It seems a little bit odd, but we're going to be dropping that Apotheosis here and the Fate and Riposte just to keep Tyrion fighting. Obviously, the physical resistance won't do much against Durthu because he does do magic damage, but the combat stat buff is significant. It'll put Tyrion around 100 melee attack and defense, which is pretty much the best combat stats of any lord in the game. So it means that he'll take relatively little damage. You can see Durthu's swings not really making solid contact there. Maybe like 1 in 3 swings or so. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what the proportions are, but I've been able to deal with most of the Way Watchers pretty effectively. You can see the balance of power is pretty heavily in my favor at this point. The Dryads are trying to come in here and support Durthu, but we're going to get a nice rear charge here with these Silver Helms. Another Flock of Doom being dropped here, and it looks like a Curse of Onray also from those Sisters of Thorn, which just barely got routed off there by the Tiranoc chariots. And yeah, pretty good so far. Tiranoc chariots almost picked up an XP chevron on the one. The other one got heavily damaged, got about a half experience chevron, so decent work done. Silver Helms, though, definitely paid dividends here in lancing down those Way Watchers and so on. We're able to tie up the back line with plenty of spearmen here, so now it's just going to be taking down Durthu. And yeah, most of the other forces are routed off at this point, just trying to take down the last leadership here. You can see the Branch Wraith is also emerging from the forest. He's been casting Earth Bloods on Durthu as much as he can here, but at this point, without any support, Durthu will be worn down over time by all these spearmen and the Lothran Seaguard firing in, just you know, continuously cutting away at him slowly. But it will eventually damage him enough that his leadership will falter. So we'll just kind of soak up some of this beautiful cinematic action with this beautiful backdrop here. Man, I love the High Elven architecture. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You can see Durthu dropping the Sword of Daith here. Fortunately, though, he's not able to hold up his leadership, so at that point, the Wood Elves are going to hit army losses, and it will be victory for the High Elves. So, well played to my opponent. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that battle. It's an interesting matchup. You know, High Elves are one of those factions that I think struggle in a lot of matchups. But against arguably the best faction in the game in the Wood Elves in many cases are one of the best factions in the game, they have a pretty favorable matchup. It's a little bit odd that one of the weakest factions in the game has a favorable matchup against one of the Tier 1 factions, but that's just kind of how Warhammer goes sometimes. I do think that the High Elves have the advantage here, personally, just because Lothran Seaguard are super cost-effective. Lothran Seaguard with shields, that is. As long as you can keep them protected from like War Dancers with swords, for example, they'll be able to hold their own quite well. You can see all of them picking up quite a few kills here. 96 on this one is very solid. The Silver Helms as well. It's arguable that you should take Dragon Princes in this matchup because, again, they have the heavy fire resistance, so they're pretty much immune to Starfire Shafts. But the Silver Helms can definitely be super cost effective. You can see one of them 72 kills, 3 XP chevrons, the other one 24 and only 1. But still, Tiranoc Chariots also did some good work kind of firing into those Sisters of Thorn and other targets. both the units of Sisters of Thorn didn't end up paying off. They kind of got caught out by the Tiranoc chariots and the Silver Helms and so on. Spearmen definitely held the line well. Some of them got into the back line and tied up those glaive guard, which is pretty decent. Tyrion himself kind of got beat up a little bit by Durthu, but was able to hold together relatively well. For my opponent, the Dryads are an okay pick here. I think that, honestly, going with Eternal Guards with shields is probably going to be a little bit better, just because the Wood Elves, or sorry, the High Elves, I mean, other than Spearmen, they tend not to, I mean, all their other infantry has relatively high armor, besides like Spearmen and Lothern Seaguard, which, I mean, that's only what I brought here, but even then, I think that Eternal Guards will trade pretty cost effectively against High Elf Spearmen. Maybe a couple Sword Dancers from the saved cost that you would have got from that, and maybe cut down the Starfire Shafts and bring... I'm not really sure. You know, it's a pretty tough matchup for the Wood Elves. Durthu's a little bit risky because if they end up bringing dragons, they obviously do fire damage and heavy AP and will be able to, you know, just bring down Durthu relatively easily. But, yeah, let's actually just take a look here in terms of the Wood Elves. Whoops, wrong one. Let's see here. So if we go to the Wood Elves here, you know, you probably honestly want to bring the Glady on a horse, just because then she's nice and mobile, as well as being relatively cheap. I'd probably cut both of these and just bring the Prey of Anathrema. You might bring this Banner of the Eternal Queen. It's pretty decent. It is relatively expensive, but 6% damage resistance and 4 leadership. I mean, that 6% damage resistance might not seem like much, but you consider that most Wood Elf units have relatively low armor. You know, all the passive mitigation rather that you can get is going to be useful. But I do think here the Branch Wraith is a good choice. One of the best tools I've found for dealing with the High Elf infantry is the Penumbral Pendulum. You can have it be regular. And it will be very good against low armor units, and if you overcast it here, it'll be very good against armor piercing. And someone, I believe, maybe it was Atticus, someone was asking about overcasting spells. If you go to the spell browser here, so like if you're in the pre-battle screen, you just right-click on any of these spells, and it'll bring up the spell browser. There's a few other ways to get to it, but you can look here, and if you click this kind of arrow button, you can see what the upgraded effect does. So for example, Melkos Mystifying Miasma upgraded gives it an extended cast range, whereas the Penumbral Pendulum does more damage when you overcast it. Earthblood has an extended effect duration, so it heals more because it lasts longer. Some spells don't have an overcast version, such as Awakening of the Wood. Some, for example, like the Withering is a single target, but if you overcast it, it adds an area of effect. So you basically in battle, it costs extra winds of magic. You can see here it goes from 7 up to 14. It also adds a miscast chance, so your wizard has a potential to take damage. However, it can be very, very useful. Penumbral Pendulum is one of those spells that it's relatively expensive if you overcast it, but if you don't, it's still pretty expensive, but it can clear out a lot of infantry very quickly. It's a super useful spell, so I would say you could bring Penumbral Pendulum and Earthblood with your Dryad. The melee attack buff is probably worth it. I'll cut Foe Seeker, and if the map has woods like the one that he was in, this Blessing of the Ancients is definitely worth it, giving you that extra recharge and power reserve. In terms of the other units here, it's tough to know what to go with in terms of infantry composition. I would probably go with something relatively headstrong, similar to what I would do with Chaos, with something like this, where we bring a whole bunch of Eternal Guards with shields, a couple of War Dancers, a couple of Spear Dancers, and then maybe 1 or 2 units of Sisters of Thorn I definitely agree with, and then maybe just go with some additional mobility. You could do some Wild Riders, just to kind of pressure lighter armor units. Wild Riders, if they get an unbraced charge into a Lothern Seaguard or a Spearman, will do a ton of damage to them. They have a very high charge bonus, including the Frenzy, so they'll do a load of shock damage. So it may be worth it in this matchup. Just a couple of thoughts. It is a pretty tough matchup, I think, for the High Elves, interestingly enough, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Or sorry, it's a tough matchup for the Wood Elves against the High Elves. If you like this kind of content, like and subscribe. I'm keeping it coming with more Total War Warhammer 2 content every single day, so stay tuned for more, and we'll see you next time.